The screech of the subway car's wheels was a physical assault, a high-pitched scream of metal on metal that vibrated through the soles of Chloe's worn leather boots and up into her teeth. It was the sound of the city's grinding, relentless heart, a sound she usually tuned out with the ease of a seasoned New Yorker. But tonight it felt different. Sharper. More predatory. Leaning against the cool glass of the door, Chloe watched her own reflection flicker over the black tunnel walls. Her wavy brown hair, a victim of the city's damp late autumn air, had escaped its clip and framed her face in a frizzy halo. Her eyes, a clear, intelligent green, were tired, shadowed by the long hours she'd spent hunched over architectural blueprints. She was a woman of lines and structure, someone who found comfort in predictable patterns, and right now her entire world felt frayed at the edges. The car was packed with the usual late-night ghosts of the city. Exhausted office workers staring blankly at their phones, a couple tangled together in a bubble of oblivious affection, a musician with a guitar case scarred like a veteran of 100 wars. A sea of anonymous faces, each locked in their own world, their combined sense a weary mix of damp wool, street food, and stale perfume. It was a place of intense, suffocating proximity and absolute, soul-crushing loneliness. Chloe clutched the strap of her messenger bag, the familiar weight of her laptop a small comfort. Just a few more stops. Then home, a cup of tea, and the blessed silence of her small, overpriced apartment. Without warning, the screech of the wheels escalated into a torturous, metallic shriek. The car didn't slow, it seized. A violent, bone-jarring lurch threw everyone forward. Chloe was slammed against the door, her breath knocked from her lungs in a sharp gasp. A woman screamed. A man swore. The train shuddered once, twice, a dying beast groaning in its death throes. And then the world ended. The lights didn't flicker. They died. One moment, the car was bathed in the harsh, buzzing fluorescent glow of the city's underbelly. The next, it was plunged into a darkness so absolute, so profound, it felt like a physical substance. It was a blackness that swallowed sound, sight, and sanity. For a single, suspended heartbeat, there was silence. The silence of shock. Then the panic started. It began as a low murmur, a ripple of nervous coughs and frightened whispers. What was that? Are we stuck? But fear is a contagion, and in the dark, it spreads like wildfire. The murmur grew into a wave of panicked shouts. A baby started to cry, its thin wail cutting through the rising chaos. The air grew thick and hot, charged with the acrid scent of raw, primal fear. The crowd surged, a blind, headless beast lurching in the dark. Chloe was jostled, pushed away from the relative stability of the door and into the churning mass of bodies. An elbow jabbed her ribs. Someone's bag caught in her hair, pulling sharply. She was unmoored, adrift in a sea of faceless terror. Her own heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the rising tide of claustrophobia. This was it. This was the urban nightmare everyone joked about but secretly feared. Trapped, helpless, and utterly, terrifyingly alone in the dark heart of the city. Chapter 2: The Stranger's Claim. Panic was a living thing in the darkness. It had hands that pushed and shoved, and a voice that screamed in a dozen different languages. Chloe stumbled, her boots slipping on the grimy floor. She was losing her balance, about to be swallowed by the frantic, churning crowd. Her breath came in short, sharp gasps, the stale air doing little to calm the frantic fluttering in her chest. Then a hand found hers. It wasn't a fumbling, accidental touch. It was deliberate. A large, warm hand that enveloped her own, his fingers lacing through hers with a calm, possessive certainty. The touch was not creepy or invasive. It was a jolt. A shock wave of pure, undiluted energy that shot up her arm and straight into the frantic center of her fear, extinguishing it like a candle flame. A wave of unnatural calm washed over her. The screams of the other passengers faded to a distant buzz. The suffocating press of bodies seemed to recede. There was only the solid, grounding anchor of his hand in hers. A body shifted behind her, blocking her from the worst of the jostling crowd. He was a wall of solid warmth at her back, a silent, immovable shield. She could feel the hard planes of his chest against her shoulders, the sheer size of him a comforting fortress. His scent cut through the stale, fear-choked air of the subway car. Not cologne but something wild, clean, and utterly primal. It was the scent of pine needles after a storm of cold winter air, of a world far away from this metal tomb. A deep voice murmured, the sound a low, chest-rumbling vibration right beside her ear. "Stay with me. You're safe." The words were simple, but they resonated deep in her bones, a command her very soul seemed to recognize. She didn't question it. She didn't pull her hand away. She leaned back slightly into the solid wall of his body, her fingers tightening around his. The panic that had been clawing at her throat dissolved completely, replaced by a profound, inexplicable sense of belonging. As if this stranger's hand was the only safe harbor she had ever known. He didn't say another word. He just stood there, a silent guardian in the abyss, his body shielding hers, his hand a constant, warm promise. Minutes stretched into an eternity. The panic in the car eventually subsided into a low thrum of anxious murmuring and whimpering, but the darkness remained absolute. And through it all he remained a steady, unmoving presence. Then with a groan of tortured metal the emergency lights flickered on. A dim, eerie orange glow filled the car, illuminating a scene of disheveled, pale-faced passengers. Chloe blinked, her eyes adjusting to the sudden, weak light. She turned, a word of thanks already on her lips, ready to finally see the face of the man who had been her anchor in the chaos. He was gone. The space behind her was empty, now occupied by a harried-looking man in a wrinkled suit. She scanned the car frantically. Faces stared back at her, confused, relieved, annoyed, but none of them belonged to him. It was impossible. He had been a solid, breathing presence just a second ago. He couldn't have just vanished into the packed crowd. It was as if he'd been a phantom, a figment of her panicked imagination. But the feeling in her hand was real. She looked down. Where his fingers had been laced with hers, her skin was glowing. A faint, silvery warmth shimmered on her palm, a delicate, almost invisible residue that pulsed with a gentle, latent energy. It wasn't a trick of the dim light. It was a mark, a claim, proof that the stranger in the dark had been real, and that he had left a piece of his impossible calm imprinted on her very skin. Chapter 3. The Scent of a Weakness. Jax materialized in the mouth of a dark, rain-slicked alley 2 blocks from the subway station, his body a taut knot of barely suppressed violence. He slammed his fist against the cold, wet brick of the wall, the impact doing little to quell the raging inferno inside him. The physical pain was nothing compared to the agony of his retreat. He dragged a hand through his dark, unruly hair, his breath coming in ragged pants. In the dim glow of a distant street lamp, his features were harsh, carved from shadow and sharp angles. His eyes, a piercing, stormy gray, were wild, his pupils blown wide with the lingering shock of the encounter. He was dressed for the urban wilderness. A worn black leather jacket that had seen better decades, dark, faded jeans and scuffed boots. He was a man built for survival, lean and powerful, every muscle coiled with the tension of a predator who had lived his entire life on the run. A lone wolf. A shifter without a pack. An outcast. He had been hunted. That was why he'd been in the city's underbelly, using the crowded anonymity of the subway to mask his scent. The men on the train, 2 of them, their scents acrid and wrong like burnt metal and old blood, were alphas from the Onyx Fong pack, hunters who collected pelts of lone wolves like trophies. He'd scented them seconds before the train stopped, and he'd been preparing for a fight to the death in the dark. And then her scent had hit him. It had cut through the fear, the stale air, the scent of his enemies, and had slammed into him like a physical blow. Rain-soaked lavender and a hint of sweet, warm vanilla. It was a scent he had unknowingly been searching for his entire life. The scent of his fated mate. The wolf inside him, a beast he had spent years mastering, had roared to the surface, a primal, uncontrollable surge of possessive need. Mate. Ours. Claim her. Protect her. In the absolute darkness, when the first wave of panic had pushed her towards him, every instinct had screamed at him to mark her, to bite into the soft flesh of her neck and claim her as his, right there in the metal tomb. It had taken every ounce of his self-control not to. He had to leave. Not just to draw the hunters away but to protect her from himself. His world was one of blood and shadows, of being hunted and fighting for every breath. It was no place for her. He pushed off the wall, his heightened senses scanning the night. He could still smell her on his skin, a ghost of lavender and vanilla that was driving his wolf insane. He forced himself to focus, to push past the intoxicating distraction. He melted into the shadows at the edge of the alley, his gray eyes fixed on the flood of passengers now spilling from the station entrance. He saw them. The two Onyx Fong Alphas. They weren't searching frantically. They were moving slowly, deliberately, their heads turning as they scanned the crowd, their nostrils flaring. They weren't just hunting him anymore. A cold, sickening dread washed over Jax. He realized his catastrophic mistake. When his hand had touched hers, when that jolt of fated recognition had arced between them, it wouldn't have been a private event. 4 shifters as powerful as the Onyx Alphas, that flare of pure primal connection would have been like a psychic beacon in the darkness. They wouldn't just have scented him. They would have scented the bond itself. They would have caught her scent on him, a scent now permanently linked to his in their predatory minds. They knew. The lone wolf, the ghost they had been hunting for months, the shifter with nothing to lose, finally had a weakness. A vulnerability. An anchor they could use to trap him and destroy him. His mission was no longer about his own survival. It was about hers. He watched as one of the hunter's gazes settled on a figure exiting the station. A woman with wavy brown hair, clutching her messenger bag as she hurried into the night. The hunter smiled, a slow, predatory curving of his lips. And in that moment, Jax's world narrowed to a single savage purpose. He would burn the entire city to the ground before he let them lay a single hand on her. Chapter 4. The Lingering Mark. Chloe's apartment, usually her sanctuary, felt alien. The familiar creak of the floorboards under her feet sounded like an intruder's footsteps. The hum of the old refrigerator was a low, ominous growl. She locked, double-locked, and chained the door, but the feeling of safety remained elusive, a ghost that had fled the moment the train lights had died. She stood in front of her bathroom mirror, staring at her hand under the bright, clinical light. The shimmering, silvery mark was still there. It wasn't on her skin, but in it, a delicate, intricate pattern like frost on a window pane, glowing with a soft, internal luminescence. When she touched it with her other hand, it was warm, a deep, comforting heat that felt impossibly alive. This was not normal. This was not a trick of the light or a symptom of shock. She tried to wash it off, scrubbing at her palm with soap and hot water until her skin was red and raw. The mark remained undimmed, a silent, irrefutable testament to the stranger in the dark. Giving up, she made a cup of tea, her hands trembling slightly. She paced the small confines of her living room, the city's distant sirens sounding like howls in the night. Her senses felt wrong. Serpent. The scent of the Earl Grey tea was an explosion of bergamot and tannin. She could smell the faint damp scent of the rain-soaked pavement from 5 floors below, the exhaust from a passing bus, the savory aroma of garlic from a neighbor's kitchen. It was overwhelming, a sensory assault that made her feel dizzy. And then there was the feeling. The unshakable, prickling sensation of being watched. She'd felt it on the walk home from the station, a crawling on the back of her neck that had made her hurry her steps and clutch her keys like a weapon. Now, even within the locked and bolted confines of her apartment, it was there. She would catch a flicker of movement in her peripheral vision, a shadow shifting in the alley across the street, viewed from her window, only to find nothing there when she looked directly. A floorboard creaked in the hallway outside her door, a sound she'd never noticed before. She told herself it was paranoia, a post-traumatic response to being trapped in the dark. But her instincts, a deep, primal part of her she rarely listened to, screamed that the danger hadn't ended when the train started moving again. It had followed her home. Exhausted, she finally collapsed into bed, pulling the covers up to her chin like a child hiding from monsters. Sleep didn't come easily. When it finally did, it was a restless, feverish thing, plagued by dreams that felt more real than reality. She was running. Not through city streets but through a vast, moonlit forest. The air was cold and clean, smelling of pine and damp earth. Her bare feet flew over moss and fallen leaves. She wasn't running from something but to something. A sense of urgency, a desperate, yearning pull, guided her through the trees. Then she heard it. The snap of a twig behind her. The panting of a pursuer. She glanced over her shoulder and saw them. 2 figures, their forms indistinct but their eyes cold, black, and utterly devoid of life. They were gaining on her. A new kind of terror, cold and sharp, seized her. She pushed herself to run faster, her lungs burning, branches whipping at her face. But she wasn't alone. She could feel him. The stranger. She couldn't see him, but she could feel his presence ahead of her, a beacon of safety in the terrifying woods. She could smell him, that impossible, unforgettable scent of pine and winter air. She ran towards the scent, towards a pair of piercing, stormy gray eyes that promised salvation. The dream was a maelstrom of fear and a desperate, illogical hope. It was her subconscious screaming a warning that her rational mind refused to accept. The monster and the savior were both terrifyingly real. Chapter 5. The Hunter's Gaze. The next day the world was painted in shades of anxiety. Every normal city sound, a car backfiring, a sudden shout, the screech of a distant train, made Chloe jump. At work she stared blankly at her computer screen, the clean, precise lines of her architectural designs a mocking contrast to the chaotic mess of her thoughts. The silvery mark on her palm remained, a constant, warm secret she kept hidden in her pocket. She felt like she was living behind a pane of glass, watching the rest of the world move on while she was still trapped in the echoes of the dark. She left work early, unable to bear the forced normalcy. The thought of taking the subway was sickening, so she decided to walk the long trek, a welcome distraction. She chose a route that took her through quieter, less crowded side streets, wanting to avoid the press of bodies, the feeling of being trapped. It was a mistake. The shortcut was an old cobblestone lane nestled between two towering brick buildings, a relic of the city's past. It was usually empty, a quiet corridor away from the main thoroughfare's roar. As she walked, the prickling sensation on the back of her neck returned, stronger than ever. She quickened her pace, her boots echoing ominously on the stones. He stepped out from a recessed doorway in front of her, blocking her path. It was an accidental collision. He bumped into her shoulder, a jarring impact that sent her stumbling back. "Watch it," she snapped, her nerves already frayed. "My apologies," the man said, his voice smooth and utterly devoid of warmth. He was unnervingly average, medium height, plain brown hair, dressed in a nondescript gray coat. But his eyes were wrong. They were black. Not dark brown, but a flat, depthless black, like polished obsidian, reflecting the dim light without a spark of life. His touch, where he'd brushed her arm, had been ice-cold, a chilling cold that seemed to suck the warmth right out of her. A predatory smile touched his lips. "It's a dangerous city," he said, his voice dropping. "Easy to get lost. Or for something precious to be found." His black eyes flickered down to her hand, the one she instinctively kept clenched in her pocket, and the smile widened. Primal fear, cold and absolute, seized Chloe. This wasn't a random encounter. He knew. Before she could scream, before she could even run, another figure materialized from the shadows of the lane. He moved with a silent, fluid grace that was utterly inhuman, placing his body between Chloe and the man in the gray coat. The air in the narrow alley instantly crackled with a lethal, invisible energy. Jax was a wall of contained violence, his stormy gray eyes blazing with a feral, killing rage. The stranger's smile faltered, replaced by a look of cold, calculating assessment. Jax didn't speak. A low, guttural growl rumbled in his chest, a sound that was not human, a sound that promised death. It was a sound Chloe felt in her bones, a terrifying yet thrilling display of raw, protective power. The man with the black eyes held up his hands in a gesture of mock surrender. "Just making a new acquaintance, Wolf," he sneered. "No need to be so territorial." He took a slow step back, his dead eyes never leaving Jax's face. "We'll be seeing you. Both of you." With that, he turned and walked away, disappearing around the corner of the lane as if he were a phantom. The immediate threat was gone, but the air was still thick with menace. Chloe was trembling, her back pressed against the cold brick wall, her mind struggling to process what had just happened. Jax turned to her. The feral rage in his eyes was banked now, replaced by a desperate, tormented urgency. The stranger from the train was real. The danger was real. He took a step towards her, his expression a mixture of profound apology and fierce, protective tenderness. "We need to talk," he said, his voice a low, rough growl that left no room for argument. "Now. Your life is in danger." Chapter 6. The Unspoken Truth. Jax didn't give Chloe a chance to refuse. His hand closed around her upper arm, the touch firm, possessive, and shockingly familiar. It was the same jolt of pure energy she'd felt in the darkness of the train, a current that silenced her protests before they could even form. It was not a harsh grip, but it was absolute. He was a force of nature and she was caught in his tide. He didn't lead her back to the main street. Instead, he pulled her deeper into the labyrinth of the city's forgotten spaces, through a narrow gap between buildings she'd never noticed before and into a small, hidden courtyard. It was a pocket of impossible stillness in the heart of the city's chaos, enclosed by the high, blind walls of old brick warehouses. A single gnarled tree grew in the center, its bare branches reaching like skeletal fingers towards the sliver of gray sky above. The moment they were hidden from view, he released her. The sudden absence of his touch was a physical ache. Who was that man? Chloe demanded, her voice shaking but laced with an anger born of terror. What is going on? How did you just appear? Jax raked a hand through his dark hair, pacing the small courtyard like a caged animal. The contained violence he had displayed moments before was still simmering just beneath his skin. He moved with a restless, predatory grace that was utterly captivating and deeply unsettling. His name is Marcus, he said, his voice a low, rough gravel. He's a hunter. And he's hunting me. Hunting you. Why? Jack stopped pacing and finally looked at her. His stormy gray eyes were filled with a torment so profound it stole her breath. Because of what I am. He didn't elaborate, but the weight of those 4 words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken meaning. On the train when the lights went out, they were there. 2 of them. I was preparing to fight. And then you found me, Chloe whispered, the realization dawning. He gave a sharp, pained nod. And then I found you. His gaze dropped to her hand, the one still glowing with his mark. When our hands touched, a fated bond flared between us. It was a beacon. They felt it. They caught your scent on me. His jaw clenched, his self-loathing a palpable force. I led them right to you. I put their mark on you. Chloe stared at him, her mind struggling to connect the dots. Fated bond. Scent. The words belonged in a fantasy novel, not in a grimy New York courtyard. What are you talking about? What are you? She demanded again, her voice rising. Jax took a deep breath, the sound ragged. We don't have time for the full story. Just know this, they are not human. And neither am I. He took a hesitant step closer, his eyes pleading with her to understand, to believe. They see you as leverage now. A weakness they can use to get to me. They will not stop. They will hunt you, Chloe. He knew her name. The realization hit her with the force of a physical blow. He'd said her name as if he'd known it his entire life. How do you know my name? She whispered, a new, more intimate fear creeping in. His expression was one of pure agony. I know everything about you now, he admitted, his voice rough with an emotion she couldn't name. Your favorite coffee order. The name of the street you grew up on. The way your heart beats faster when you're scared. He took another step, closing the distance between them. The air grew thick, charged with an impossible magnetic tension. It's the bond. It connects us. I can feel you. He was so close now she could feel the heat radiating from his body, could smell that wild, intoxicating scent of pine and winter that was now inextricably linked to safety in her mind. His gaze dropped to her lips, and the air between them became a humming high-voltage wire. The wolf in him, the predator, was staring out from behind his human eyes, and it was looking at her with a raw, hungry, possessive need that had nothing to do with protection and everything to do with claiming. The fear was still there, a cold knot in her stomach. But beneath it something else was stirring. A dark, reckless curiosity. An answering pull. Her own body was betraying her, humming in response to his proximity, yearning to close the final few inches between them. Her breath hitched. Her lips parted. The world narrowed to the stormy gray of his eyes and the promise of a danger she secretly wanted to taste. Chapter 7. The Den. The moment hung between them, stretched taut with unspoken promises and unspoken threats. Jax's gaze was a physical touch, tracing the line of her lips, her jaw, her throat. The growl was back in his chest, a low, constant rumble of possessive, frustrated desire. Chloe felt her own pulse quicken, a frantic, fluttering bird in her veins. She should have run. He should have screamed. Instead she stood her ground, mesmerized, waiting for the storm to break. He broke the spell, but not in the way she expected. He took a sharp, ragged breath and physically recoiled, taking a step back as if her proximity burned him. The loss of his heat was immediate and sharp. "We have to go," he said, his voice a harsh rasp. He turned his back to her as if he couldn't bear to look at her any longer. "My scent is all over this courtyard. They'll find it. We need to get you somewhere safe." "Safe where?" Chloe asked, her voice still shaky. "My apartment. They followed me there." "No," he said, his back still to her. "Your world is no longer safe. The only safe place for you now is in mine." He turned his head, his profile sharp and unforgiving in the dim light. "You're coming with me." It wasn't a request. It was a command, imbued with a primal authority that brooked no argument. Before she could protest, he was moving, grabbing her hand, the marked one, and pulling her after him. His grip was a manacle of warm, living energy, chaining her to him. He led her on a dizzying, disorienting journey through the city's hidden veins. They moved through alleys slick with grime, across rooftops with breathtaking, vertiginous views, and through the echoing service tunnels of the city's underbelly. He moved with the silent, certain grace of a creature born to the shadows, and she had no choice but to follow, her heart pounding with a mixture of terror and a wild, exhilarating thrill. He was danger and safety wrapped in one intoxicating package. His den was not what she expected. He led her to a derelict industrial building on the edge of the meatpacking district, its windows boarded up, its brick facade crumbling. But the heavy steel door he unlocked opened into a space that was a stark contrast to the decay outside. It was a vast open-plan loft, a former warehouse converted into a minimalist, functional sanctuary. The space was dominated by a large, comfortable-looking leather sofa, a scarred wooden table and shelves overflowing with books. A state-of-the-art security console with multiple monitors blinked silently in one corner. It was a survivor's fortress, a place of Spartan comfort and constant vigilance. But it was the scent that hit her first. His scent. Pine and winter air, 100 times more potent than before. It saturated the air, clung to the furniture, seeped into the very walls. It was the scent of him, the scent of home, and her body responded before her mind could, a deep, cellular sigh of relief. He released her hand and moved to the security console, his fingers flying across the keyboard. "I've scrubbed our trail for now," he said, not looking at her. "But they'll be searching." Chloe stood awkwardly in the center of the vast room, feeling small and out of place. This was his world. A world of shadows, hunters, and constant, imminent danger. "So this is it?" she asked, her voice small. "I just live here now?" He finally turned from the monitors, his gray eyes weary. "Until I can neutralize the threat. Until I know you're safe." The silence stretched between them, thick with the unspoken realities of their situation. She was his prisoner, his responsibility, his fated mate. He was her captor, her protector, her greatest danger. "I need to shower," she said suddenly, the grime and fear of the day a heavy cloak on her skin. He nodded towards a door. "Through there. There are clean clothes on the bed. They might be big on you." The bathroom was as Spartan and clean as the rest of the loft. As the hot water streamed over her, Chloe leaned her head against the cool tile, closing her eyes. She was trying to process the impossible. Shifters, hunters, fated bonds. But her mind kept circling back to him. To the feel of his hand in hers, the possessive fire in his eyes, the low, protective growl in his chest. When she emerged, wrapped in a large, soft towel, her hair dripping, she found him standing by the loft's massive industrial window, staring out at the night. He had shed his leather jacket, and the simple gray t-shirt he wore stretched taut across the powerful muscles of his back and shoulders. He was a portrait of contained, lethal power. He must have heard her because he turned. His breath hitched, a sharp, audible sound in the quiet room. His gaze swept over her bare shoulders, the towel that clung to her damp skin, the trail of water dripping from her hair. The air in the room instantly became thick, heavy, charged with a current of raw, animal magnetism. The protector was gone. The wolf was back, and his eyes were burning with a hunger that had nothing to do with food and everything to do with her. Chapter 8. The Wolf at the Door. The way Jax looked at her was a physical force. It stripped the air from her lungs, sent a bolt of pure liquid heat straight to her core. His stormy gray eyes had darkened to the color of a tempest, swirling with a hunger so raw and undisguised it was both terrifying and intoxicating. The bond between them, which had been a low, constant hum, now roared to life, a screaming inferno of mutual, undeniable need. He took a step towards her and then another. He moved with a slow, deliberate grace, a predator closing in on its prey. Chloe's heart hammered against her ribs, a wild drumbeat in the sudden, deafening silence of the loft. She didn't move. She couldn't. Her feet were rooted to the spot, her body transfixed, waiting. "You smell of rain and lavender," he growled, his voice a low, rough vibration that resonated deep inside her. He stopped just inches from her, close enough for her to feel the furnace-like heat radiating from his body. "It's driving me insane." He lifted a hand, his fingers hovering just above the bare skin of her shoulder, not quite touching, yet she could feel the heat from his calloused fingertips as if he were branding her. His knuckles were scarred, the hand of a fighter, a survivor. His gaze dropped to the spot, his pupils dilating. "I want to ruin you," he whispered, the confession torn from him, a raw, agonizing admission. "I want to bite into this skin, mark you, claim you so every hunter, every wolf, every man in this city knows you are mine." Chloe's breath hitched. A shiver, not of fear but of pure, shocking arousal, traced its way down her spine. The towel suddenly felt impossibly flimsy, the only barrier between her and the storm of his desire. "What's stopping you?" she breathed, the question a reckless dare. She didn't know where the words came from, what brave, foolish part of her was speaking. A muscle in his jaw clenched, the only sign of the ferocious battle for control raging within him. "You," he snarled, his eyes lifting to meet hers. They were filled with a desperate, tormented tenderness that was a stark, painful contrast to the savage hunger in his voice. "You are human. You are fragile. My world will break you." His gaze flickered down to her lips. "And I would rather tear myself apart than be the one to do the breaking." The vulnerability in his confession was more seductive than any threat. He was a monster holding himself on a leash for her sake. The tension between them was a living thing, a razor's edge of desire so sharp it was painful. He was going to kiss her. She knew it. She could feel the intent rolling off him in waves. She leaned forward, her lips parting in anticipation. The security console behind him let out a series of sharp, urgent beeps. The spell shattered. Jax spun around, the predator instantly replaced by the vigilant guardian. He was at the console in 2 strides, his fingers flying across the keyboard. Chloe clutched her towel tighter, her heart still pounding from the aborted kiss. The abrupt shift from searing intimacy to cold, imminent danger a jarring whiplash. "What is it?" she asked, her voice thin. "Perimeter breach," he snapped, his eyes glued to one of the monitors, which now showed a grainy night vision view of the alley below. "Motion sensor at the east entrance." His entire body went rigid. "Damn it." On the screen a figure was moving. It was a shadowy silhouette, but it moved with an unnatural speed, hugging the darkest corners of the alley. "Is it them?" Chloe whispered, moving to stand beside him, the cold fear returning with a vengeance. "No," Jax growled, his eyes narrowed. "This is one. And he's not one of the hunters from the train." He zoomed in, the image sharpening slightly. The figure paused under a weak security light, turning its head to scan the building. The face was pale, the eyes 2 dark pits in the grainy footage. But it was the scent, faint but unmistakable even to Chloe's newly heightened senses, that made her stomach clench. It was the man from the cobblestone lane. "Marcus." "He found us," she breathed, her voice filled with disbelief. "How? You said you scrubbed our trail." "He's a tracker," Jax snarled, his frustration and fury a palpable force. "One of the best. And he had your scent to follow." His gaze flickered to her, his expression grim. "My scent is a challenge to him. But yours is a beacon. A treasure map that leads him right to me." He slammed his fist on the console, the quiet violence of the act making Chloe jump. He wasn't just angry at the hunter. He was furious with himself, with the bond, with the undeniable fact that her very presence, the thing his wolf craved above all else, was the thing that was putting them in the gravest danger. The wolf was at the door and he had followed her scent to get there. Chapter 9. A Savage Dance. "Stay here," Jax commanded, his voice a low, lethal growl. "Stay away from the windows. Do not open the door. For anyone." He was already moving, shrugging on his worn leather jacket, the movements economical and deadly. He was no longer the tormented man struggling with his desire. He was a warrior preparing for battle. Where are you going? Chloe cried, her heart seizing with a new kind of terror, not for herself but for him. To end this, he said, his back to her as he pulled a pair of leather gloves from his pocket. He turned, and the look in his stormy gray eyes made her blood run cold. The humanity was gone, replaced by the flat, merciless gaze of a killer. He came for a fight. I'm not going to make him wait. Before she could protest, he was gone, slipping out a side door she hadn't even noticed, a ghost disappearing into the shadows of his own den. Chloe was left alone in the vast, silent loft, the blinking red light on the security monitor a frantic, mocking heartbeat. She crept to the main monitor, her bare feet silent on the cold concrete floor. The screen showed the alley below. It was empty. The motion sensor was no longer triggered. Had Marcus left? Or was he hiding, waiting? Then she saw movement. Two figures emerged from the deepest shadows at the far end of the alley, circling each other like wolves in a deadly, silent dance. It was Jax and Marcus. There was no preamble, no posturing. There was only a sudden, brutal explosion of violence. They moved with a speed and ferocity that was utterly inhuman. It wasn't a fist fight. It was a clash of predators. Chloe watched, her hand pressed to her mouth, a silent scream trapped in her throat. Jax was a blur of dark leather and controlled fury, his movements fluid and savage. Marcus was his opposite, jerky and unervingly fast, his limbs seeming to bend at impossible angles. The sounds drifted up to her, faint but sickening. The wet smack of fist on flesh. A sharp crack that could have been bone. A low, guttural snarl that was pure animal. Chloe realized with a jolt of horror that the snarl had come from Jax. Jax was faster, stronger. He landed a brutal kick to Marcus's ribs that sent the hunter stumbling back. Jax pressed his advantage, a relentless, punishing assault of fists and feet. But Marcus was resilient. He took the blows with an unnatural stillness, his head snapping back from a punch that would have felled a normal man, only to grin, a trickle of dark blood leaking from his lips. He was toying with Jax. He was testing him. Then Marcus did something that made Chloe's blood freeze. As Jax lunged, Marcus sidestepped and his gaze flickered up, directly towards the loft window. Directly at her. His dead, black eyes seemed to pierce the glass, to find her in the darkness of the room. He smiled again, a slow, triumphant grin that was filled with malice. He hadn't come for a fight with Jax. He had come to confirm. To see her. To mark her location. The distraction was all he needed. As Jax's attention was momentarily divided by the direction of Marcus's gaze, the hunter moved. He wasn't aiming for Jax. He produced a small metallic object from his coat and hurled it with impossible speed not at Jax, but at the base of the building, directly below the window where Chloe stood. The object hit the brickwork with a soft thud and stuck there. It began to emit a faint, sickly green smoke. Jax roared, a sound of pure, frustrated fury, and lunged for the device. But Marcus was already gone, melting back into the shadows of the alley with the same ghostly speed he had appeared. Jax stared at the smoking device for a second, then his head snapped up towards the window, his gray eyes wild with a new, frantic terror. Chloe couldn't hear him, but she could read his lips, could feel the desperate command slam into her through their bond. Run. Chapter 10. Branded by the Hunt. The green smoke was not thick, but it was insidious. It didn't rise. It seeped, crawling up the brick face of the building like a malevolent vine. Chloe stared at it, frozen for a heartbeat, her mind struggling to comprehend the new threat. Then Jax's raw panic hit her through the bond, a jolt of pure adrenaline that shattered her paralysis. She scrambled back from the window just as the first wisp of the sickly sweet smoke curled through a crack in the window frame. The scent was cloying, unnatural, a mix of bitter herbs and something metallic like old blood. It wasn't just a smell. It felt like an invasion, a violation of the safe space he had created. Jax burst back into the loft, his face a mask of grim fury. He had a shallow cut on his cheekbone and his knuckles were raw and bleeding, but his eyes were fixed on the wisp of green smoke. What is it? Chloe choked out, her throat already feeling tight. Scent marker, he snarled, already moving through the loft, grabbing a duffel bag from a closet and throwing it on the sofa. It's not a poison. It's a brand. It will saturate this entire place, cling to everything. It makes you trackable to their kind from miles away. We can't stay here. You have to go. Now. His words were a death knell for the fragile sense of safety she had begun to feel. This den, his sanctuary, was now a trap. She was the bait, and they had just painted the trap in a color only the predators could see. He moved with a desperate, frantic efficiency, throwing a few changes of clothes, a burner phone, and a roll of cash into the bag. He grabbed a small, heavy-looking metal box from under his bed and shoved it in as well. "What about you?" she asked, watching him, feeling useless. "Are you hurt?" "It's nothing," he dismissed, though she could see the strain in his shoulders, the shallow, pained quality of his breathing. Marcus had landed more blows than she'd realized. He zipped the bag and slung it over his shoulder, then he turned to her. He was still wearing only the thin t-shirt and jeans, his leather jacket left behind in the alley. The protective gear was gone, leaving him exposed. "We'll use the rooftops," he said, his voice grim. "It's our only chance of breaking the scent trail." He led her to the back of the loft, to a reinforced door that opened onto a rusted iron fire escape. The cold night air hit her, carrying with it the sickly sweet scent of the marker, stronger now. The city spread out below them, a glittering, indifferent sprawl of lights and shadows. "I can't," Chloe breathed, looking at the dizzying drop. Jax turned, his face softening for a fraction of a second. The fierce warrior was replaced by the tormented protector. He cupped her face in his hands, his palms rough and warm against her cold skin. "Yes, you can," he said, his voice a low, compelling murmur. "Look at me, Chloe. Only at me. Trust me. I will not let you fall." His stormy gray eyes were an anchor in the swirling vertigo. The bond between them was a steady, warm current, a silent promise of his absolute commitment to her safety. She took a deep breath, the scent of him, pine and winter, momentarily overwhelming the foul scent of the marker. She nodded. The journey across the rooftops was a terrifying, exhilarating blur. He moved with the grace and certainty of a creature born to the heights, leaping across impossible gaps, his powerful body a whisper in the darkness. He never let go of her hand, his grip a warm, unbreakable link. He was her strength, her courage. They paused on a flat, gravel-covered roof 2 buildings away, crouching behind an air-conditioning unit. Below them, the street was no longer empty. 2 black sedans had pulled up to the curb in front of Jax's building, their headlights off. Figures in dark clothing emerged, moving with a silent, military precision towards the entrance. The hunters had arrived in force. Chloe's heart leaped into her throat. They were too late. But as she watched, Jax's body tensed beside her, a low, savage growl vibrating in his chest. His eyes were not on the hunters below. They were fixed on her. "What?" she whispered, her voice trembling. He reached out, his gloved fingers gently touching the sleeve of her sweater, near her shoulder. "The smoke," he breathed, his voice filled with a new, horrifying realization. "It got on you." She looked down. A faint, almost invisible dusting of green powder clung to the fabric of her sleeve. It hadn't been just the building. Marcus's target had been her. He was a walking beacon. There was no escape. No matter where they ran, she would lead them right to him. He was the brand. He was the trap. And it was about to be sprung. Chapter 11. An Unholy Alliance. The faint green dust on Chloe's sleeve was a declaration of war. It was a mark of ownership placed on her by his enemies, a glowing X on a treasure map that led straight to Jax's heart. His failure was so absolute, so profound, it was a physical agony. The growl in his chest wasn't just anger. It was the sound of a cornered wolf's self-loathing. "Get it off," he snarled, his voice a raw rasp of desperation. He grabbed the sleeve of her sweater, his intention to rip the tainted fabric away, to tear the brand from her. "Jax, stop." Chloe's voice was sharp, cutting through his panic. "You'll make it worse. It'll get on both of us." He froze, his hands hovering over her arm, his whole body trembling with the effort of holding back. He was right. He was thinking like a beast, not a strategist. He forced himself to take a deep, shuddering breath, the sickly sweet scent of the marker of vile poison in his lungs. Down below, the hunters were swarming his building, moving with an unnerving, silent efficiency. They would find the loft empty. They would find the scent marker. And then they would begin the real hunt, fanning out through the city, following the invisible trail that now painted Chloe as their target. "We need a new plan," Chloe said, her voice surprisingly steady. The initial terror was still there, a cold knot in her stomach, but it was being overshadowed by a new, unfamiliar resolve. She was no longer just a victim in this. She was a participant. We can't outrun them if they can smell me. So we have to go somewhere they won't think to look. Somewhere they can't go. Jax stared at her, the chaos in his mind slowly giving way to a grudging admiration. She wasn't panicking. She was thinking. There is no such place, he said, his voice grim. They have resources, influence. Do they have influence over the Onyx Fong pack? She asked, the name a strange foreign word on her tongue. He stiffened. The hunters are the Onyx Fong. No, she corrected, her green eyes sharp and clear. Marcus said, we'll be seeing you. He didn't say, the pack will be seeing you. He and the men on the train, are they the entire pack? He saw where she was going. A wild, impossibly dangerous idea was forming in her mind. They're a faction, he admitted, his voice low. A radical sect led by a brutal alpha named Silas. They believe lone wolves and human-mated shifters dilute the bloodline. They're fanatics, but they don't represent the entire pack. The official pack alpha is an old-world traditionalist named Roman. And would this Roman approve of his men hunting lone wolves and terrorizing humans in the middle of his territory? Chloe pressed. A flicker of something, a dangerous, desperate hope, ignited in Jax's chest. Roman despises Silas, he murmured. He sees him as a dishonorable upstart. But he has no proof of his unsanctioned hunts. Then we give him some, Chloe said, her voice gaining strength. She looked down at the green dust on her sleeve. This isn't just a brand. It's evidence. We're not going to run. We're going to walk right into the lion's den. Her gaze met his, her expression a mixture of terror and fierce, unyielding determination. You're going to take me to see the alpha of the Onyx Fong pack. It was insane. It was suicide. A lone wolf walking willingly into the territory of the pack that wanted him dead was a lamb offering its throat to the butcher. But it was also brilliant. It was the one move Silas would never anticipate. He was hunting a ghost, a runner. He would never expect his prey to seek sanctuary with his own alpha. The primal protective part of Jax screamed in protest. The risk was too great. But the survivor, the strategist who had stayed alive this long by making impossible choices, saw the cold, brutal logic in her plan. He will demand a price, Jax warned, his voice a low growl. An alpha like Roman does nothing for free. Especially not for a lone wolf. Then we'll pay it, Chloe said simply. She reached out and for the first time initiated a touch. Her clean hand came up to cup his jaw, her thumb gently stroking the shallow cut on his cheek. The contact was electric, a jolt of pure, unwavering faith that arced through the bond and settled deep in his soul. We'll do it together. He leaned into her touch, his eyes closing for a fraction of a second. She was magnificent. Terrified, out of her depth, and more courageous than any shifter he had ever known. His wolf, which had been raging with the need to run and hide her, settled into a new, more dangerous resolve. It was no longer just about survival. It was about vengeance. All right, he breathed, his stormy eyes opening, now blazing with a cold, clear fire. We go to the lion's den. But we don't go as lambs. He looked down at the hunters swarming his building. We go as the ones setting the trap. Chapter 12. The Price of Sanctuary. The Onyx Fong territory was in the oldest, most Gothic part of the city. The buildings were monoliths of dark stone and wrought iron, their gargoyle-adorned facades watching the streets with ancient, malevolent eyes. The very air here was different, heavier, saturated with the scent of old power, secrets, and a deep, primal dominance that made the wolf inside Jax snarl with territorial aggression. Every instinct screamed at him to flee. Walking here was a violation, an act of submission. He kept Chloe tucked close to his side, his arm a possessive band around her waist, his body a shield against the unseen eyes he could feel watching them from every shadow. He had made her change, leaving the marked sweater behind, but the scent still clung to her skin, a faint, ghostly perfume that was a constant, agonizing reminder of their vulnerability. Their destination was a private, members-only club called The Sanctum, its entrance a single unmarked iron door in a silent, cobbled lane. 2 guards, massive shifters built like mountains, stood on either side. They didn't speak, but their dead, black eyes missed nothing. Their scents were a wall of pure, hostile dominance. We are here to see Alpha Roman, Jax said, his voice calm and steady, betraying none of the raging tension inside him. Tell him the lone wolf he has been seeking has come to pay his respects. The guard's eyes widened almost imperceptibly. They exchanged a look and one of them disappeared inside. The wait was agonizing. They stood in the silent lane, exposed, the minutes stretching into an eternity. Every shadow seemed to hold a threat. Finally, the guard returned and jerked his head towards the door. He will see you. The inside of the sanctum was a world of dark wood, worn leather and hushed, dangerous quiet. Shifters, all bearing the subtle onyx fong mark, watched them from shadowed booths and the long polished bar. The air was thick with the scent of whiskey, cigar smoke and 100 years of secrets. They were led to a private room at the back, where a man sat in a high-backed leather armchair, a half-empty glass of amber liquid in his hand. Alpha Roman was not a physically imposing man like his guards. He was older, perhaps in his late 50s, with silver-streaked dark hair and a face that was more aristocratic than brutish. He wore a tailored suit of impeccable quality. But his power was a palpable force in the room, a deep ancient gravity that pulled everything towards him. His eyes, a dark, intelligent brown, held the wisdom and the weariness of a king who had fought 1,000 battles. He gestured to the two chairs opposite him. Jack sat, pulling Chloe's chair so close their knees were touching. A lone wolf, Roman said, his voice a smooth, cultured baritone. He took a slow sip of his drink, his eyes studying Jack's over the rim of the glass. You have been a ghost in my city for some time, causing my more enthusiastic members a great deal of frustration. They have been hunting me without your sanction, Jack stated, cutting straight to the point. Roman's expression didn't change. Silas and his followers believe they are purging the city of weakness. A noble if misguided ambition. Their ambition led them to this, Jack said. He reached over and took Chloe's hand, turning it palm up to reveal the faint, silvery mark of their bond. They marked my mate, a human. They branded her with a scent tracker and laid siege to my den in your territory. Roman's eyes narrowed, his gaze shifting to Chloe for the first time. He studied her, his expression unreadable, then looked at the mark on her hand. A long, tense silence filled the room. Silas has overstepped, Roman said finally, his voice dangerously soft. Attacking a human on my territory, a fated mate no less. It is a violation of the old laws. It is a dishonor. Then you will stop him, Jack said. Roman smiled, a slow, cold curving of his lips. I will. For a price. He leaned forward, placing his glass on the table. You are a powerful wolf, Jax. To survive this long alone, to evade my best trackers. It is a testament to your strength. Strength that is being wasted. He paused, his dark eyes boring into Jack's. The price for my protection, for my justice against Silas, is your allegiance. You will kneel. You will swear fealty to me. You will join the Onyx Fong Pack and you will serve me as one of my enforcers. Your ghost days are over. The air was sucked from the room. It was the one price Jax had never been willing to pay. To give up his freedom, to bend his knee, to chain his wolf to another's will. It was a fate he considered worse than death. He had spent his entire life running from the politics and brutality of pack life. He could feel Chloe's terror through the bond, her silent plea for him to agree, to do whatever it took to keep them safe. But he could also feel the wolf inside him, the wild, untamable thing that had kept him alive, snarling in protest, fighting against the invisible chains of Roman's demand. He looked at Chloe, at her wide, frightened green eyes, at the faint toxic scent that still clung to her, at the shimmering mark of their bond on her hand. He saw his future, a future he hadn't known he wanted until it was threatened. And he knew with a soul-deep, agonizing certainty that there was no choice. His freedom was a price he was finally willing to pay. Chapter 13. The Kneeling. The act of kneeling was a physical violation. As Jax slowly lowered himself to one knee on the plush, blood-red carpet of Roman's office, every muscle in his body screamed in protest. His wolf, the wild, free part of him that had defined his very existence, was a raging tempest in his soul, clawing at the walls of his control, howling at the indignity. To kneel before another alpha was to surrender, to admit defeat, to place his throat, both literally and figuratively, at another's mercy. He kept his eyes on Chloe. She sat frozen in her chair, her hands clenched in her lap, her face pale. She was his anchor, the reason he was doing this. The sight of her, so fragile and yet so fierce, was the only thing that kept him from tearing the room and everyone in it apart. Jax, he began, the ancient words of the oath feeling like ash and broken glass in his mouth. Lone wolf of no pack, do hereby swear my strength, my loyalty, and my life to Alpha Roman of the Onyx Fong. He bowed his head, the ultimate gesture of submission. I am your sword and your shield. I live and die by your command. The silence that followed was absolute. Chloe held her breath. The bond between them was a raw, open wound of his agony and her terror. Roman let the silence stretch, savoring the moment. He rose from his chair and walked over to Jax, circling him like a connoisseur inspecting a new valuable acquisition. Rise, Jax of the Onyx Fong, he said, his voice resonating with the formal power of acceptance. Jax stood, his body feeling heavy, alien. He was no longer a ghost. He had a name, a pack, a leash. You have made a wise choice, Roman said, a hint of satisfaction in his voice. He turned his attention to Chloe. As for your mate, she will be given sanctuary in my personal apartments within this building. She will be guarded. No one will touch her. Silas will not be able to reach her here. The words were meant to be reassuring, but they felt like another set of chains. Chloe would be a guest, but she would also be a prisoner, a golden-caged canary in the den of wolves. Now, Roman said, turning back to Jax, his expression all business. The matter of Silas. He walked to his desk and pressed a button on an intercom. Send for Marcus. Chloe's blood ran cold. Marcus. The dead-eyed hunter from the alley. A few minutes later the door opened and Marcus entered. He was dressed in the same nondescript gray coat, his face impassive. He stopped short when he saw Jax and Chloe, his obsidian eyes widening for a fraction of a second in shock, before his expression smoothed back into a blank, unreadable mask. Alpha, he said, his voice flat, bowing his head to Roman. Marcus, Roman said, his tone deceptively casual. You are one of Silas's most loyal hounds, are you not? Marcus's posture went rigid. I serve the pack, Alpha. Do you? Roman countered, his voice like silk sliding over steel. My new enforcer, Jax, tells me a rather disturbing story. A story about unsanctioned hunts. About the use of forbidden scent markers. About an attack on a human mate on my territory. Roman paused, letting the accusations settle in the silent room. Tell me, Marcus, is there any truth to this story? Marcus's gaze flickered to Jax, a silent, murderous promise in their depths. But his loyalty was absolute. He would not betray his true alpha. Lone wolves are a blight, he stated, his voice cold. We were cleansing the city. You were acting without my authority, Roman corrected, his voice dropping, taking on a dangerous edge. You brought dishonor to my pack. You broke the old laws. He walked over to Marcus, his movements slow and deliberate. And for that there must be a reckoning. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't move quickly. But what happened next was a blur of shocking, brutal violence. Roman's hand shot out, his fingers clamping around Marcus's throat. There was a sickening wet crack. Marcus is dead, black eyes widened in a final moment of shock, and then he crumpled to the floor, a puppet with its strings cut. Chloe gasped, a hand flying to her mouth, her stomach churning. Roman looked down at the body, his face impassive, then looked at Jax. Silas has been my problem for a long time, he said calmly, wiping his hand on a silk handkerchief. You, Jax, are now my solution. You have a personal stake in this. You will hunt the hunter. Find Silas. Find every member of his faction. Bring them to me alive. I will pass judgment. He smiled, a cold, predatory expression. This is your first command as a wolf of the Onyx Fong. Do not fail me. He was giving Jax the one thing he craved above all else. Sanctioned righteous vengeance. It was a brilliant, cruel, and perfect trap. He had not just bought Jax's loyalty, he had weaponized his pain. Chapter 14. The Golden Cage. Chloe's new home was a cage, albeit the most beautiful one she had ever seen. Roman's private apartments were a world away from the dark, masculine menace of the sanctum below. They were a suite of rooms decorated in pale creams and golds, filled with priceless antiques and soft plush fabrics. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a stunning panoramic view of the city, but they did not open. They were sealed, reinforced panes of glass that served only to emphasize her confinement. She was alone. After the brutal, shocking events in Roman's office, Jax had been dismissed, sent out into the night to begin his hunt. He had looked at her one last time before he left, his stormy eyes filled with a silent, agonizing promise to return, and then he was gone. Now the bond between them was a thin, stretched wire of anxiety. She could feel him, a distant, restless presence moving through the city's shadows. She could feel his focus, his cold, lethal rage, a hunter now unleashed. And she could feel his constant, aching awareness of her, a lighthouse in the storm of his mission. She was treated with a cold, formal courtesy. A silent, grim-faced she-wolf brought her meals on a silver tray. The guards outside her door were unobtrusive but always there. She was a treasured object, a piece of leverage being kept polished and safe until her owner returned. The thought was both comforting and deeply unsettling. On the second day she had a visitor. She was curled on a silk chaise lounge, trying to read a book she couldn't focus on, when the door opened and Alpha Roman entered. He was dressed as impeccably as before, a faint, pleasant scent of sandalwood and old books preceding him. He smiled, a polite, disarming expression that didn't reach his eyes. "I trust you are comfortable, my dear," he said, his voice smooth. "I am a prisoner," Chloe replied, her voice quiet but firm. She would not play the part of the meek, grateful guest. His smile widened slightly. "You are protected. There is a difference." He walked over to the window, gazing out at the city. "Jax is making excellent progress. He is methodical. 2 more of Silas's inner circle were apprehended this morning." Chloe's heart gave a nervous flutter. She could feel the distant echoes of Jax's hunt through the bond. Surges of violence, flashes of cold satisfaction, but she had no details. "He is a remarkable wolf," Roman continued, turning from the window to look at her. "Fierce, intelligent, utterly dedicated, a perfect weapon. I am most pleased with my acquisition." The way he said acquisition made her skin crawl. "He is not a weapon," she said, her voice tight. "He is a person." "Is he?" Roman countered, one eyebrow raised. "Or is he a collection of instincts and appetites, currently focused on you? You are the key to him, Chloe. The anchor that allows him to be controlled. The reason he knelt. Do not ever forget that." He was warning her. Reminding her of her place in this game. She was not a player, she was the prize. "Why are you here, Alpha?" she asked, deciding to meet his power play with her own directness. He walked over and sat in the armchair opposite her, his posture relaxed, but his eyes sharp and calculating. "I am curious about you. About the bond. A fated bond between a lone wolf and a human is exceedingly rare. A thing of legends. It creates a connection of unparalleled strength." His gaze dropped to her hand. "And it can be a conduit for other things." A cold premonition slid down Chloe's spine. "Jax is a creature of immense power," Roman said, his voice a low, hypnotic murmur. "But it is a raw, undisciplined power. He has spent his life surviving, not honing his gifts. But the bond changes things. It opens pathways. A powerful mate can act as a catalyst, an amplifier." He leaned forward, his dark eyes intense. "Have you noticed any changes in yourself, Chloe? Beyond the heightened senses? New feelings? New strengths?" She thought of the strange, fierce courage she had found within herself, the way she had conceived of their desperate plan. She thought of the way she could feel Jax's emotions, almost as if they were her own. "The bond works both ways," Roman said, as if reading her mind. "He gives you his protection, a piece of his wolf's awareness. And you, my dear, you give him a focus, a clarity. You are making him stronger, more dangerous, every single day." He smiled, a thin, chilling expression. "And that is precisely what I was counting on." He stood to leave, the interview apparently over. "Enjoy the view," he said, gesturing to the window. "Jax will return when his work is done. I have no doubt he will be most eager to celebrate his victory with you." The silken threat in his voice was unmistakable. He had not just chained Jax to his will, he was grooming him, sharpening his weapon. And he was reminding Chloe that she was the forge in which that weapon was being tempered. The realization was terrifying. He was not just a prisoner. She was an accomplice. Chapter 15. The Scent of Home. 3 days. It had been 3 days since she had seen Jax. 3 days of an agonizing, stretch-thin connection through the bond. She felt him as a constant low-grade fever in her blood, a distant storm of violence and relentless focus. There were moments of sharp, terrifying intensity, a sudden spike of rage, a flash of brutal combat, that would make her gasp and clutch her stomach. Then there were long periods of quiet, simmering tension, the feeling of a predator lying in wait. She was living his hunt in disconnected, visceral echoes, and the strain was wearing her down. She hadn't slept. She had barely eaten. She spent her hours pacing the confines of her golden cage, her eyes fixed on the city below, searching for a ghost she couldn't see. The fear for his safety was a constant gnawing thing. She knew he was a formidable fighter, but he was one wolf against a faction of fanatics. On the third night she was standing by the window, watching the endless river of headlights flowing through the city's arteries, when she felt a shift in the bond. The distant, restless energy that had defined him for the past 72 hours was gone. It was replaced by a new feeling, a sense of finality, of grim, bloody satisfaction. And it was closer. Much, much closer. Her heart leaped into her throat. He was back. She didn't hear the door open. She just felt his presence fill the room, a wave of dark, potent energy that was 100 times more intense than she remembered. He spun around. He stood in the doorway, a figure carved from shadow and exhaustion. He was caked in grime and dried blood, some of it his, some of it not. His dark hair was matted, his face was bruised, and a fresh, deep cut ran along his jawline. He looked like he had walked through hell and dragged it back with him. But he was standing. He was alive. His stormy gray eyes found hers across the room, and the raw, desperate hunger in them was a physical blow. The hunt was over. The warrior was gone. And the wolf, starved and victorious, had come home to claim its mate. He didn't speak. He just moved, crossing the room in 3 long, silent strides. Chloe met him halfway, her own body moving on pure, desperate instinct. They crashed together in the center of the room, his arms banding around her like steel, lifting her off her feet and crushing her against the hard, unyielding wall of his chest. She buried her face in his neck, inhaling his scent, pine, winter, and the metallic tang of battle. It was the most beautiful smell in the world. A sob of pure, undiluted relief tore from her throat. "You're safe," she whispered, her hands tangling in his filthy hair, holding on as if she'd never let go. "It's over," he growled, his voice a rough, broken sound against her skin. "Silas is in Roman's cells. They're all gone." He pulled back just enough to look at her, his hands framing her face, his thumbs stroking away the tears on her cheeks. His eyes were blazing with a possessive, triumphant fire. "You are safe." The relief, the fear, the agonizing separation, the desperate longing, it all coalesced into a single overwhelming need that roared between them through the bond. The air was thick with it, a current of pure, unadulterated passion that had been denied for too long. "Jax," she breathed, her voice a plea. That was all it took. His mouth crashed down on hers and the world exploded. It was not a gentle kiss. It was a brutal, desperate claiming. A kiss of starvation and salvation, of fury and relief. His lips were hard, demanding, his taste a wild, intoxicating mix of blood, sweat, and him. He kissed her like a drowning man taking his first breath, like a wolf staking its claim on the one thing it could not bear to lose. She answered him with equal fervor, her hands sliding from his hair to grip his broad shoulders, pulling him impossibly closer. He backed her up against the nearest wall, his powerful body pinning hers, leaving no space, no air, no thought between them. One of his hands slid down her back to cup her bottom, lifting her so she could wrap her legs around his waist. The feeling of his hard, muscular body against hers, even through their clothes, was an agony of pleasure. He broke the kiss only to trail a line of fire down her jaw, his teeth grazing the sensitive skin of her neck. A low, possessive growl rumbled in his chest. "Mine," he snarled against her throat, the word a brand, a promise, a prayer. "You are mine, Chloe." She arched against him, a helpless, keening sound escaping her lips. The tension, the fear, the waiting, it was all about to break. He was home. He was safe. And tonight there would be no more holding back. Tonight the wolf would finally have its due. Chapter 16. The Spoils of War. The world outside the golden cage ceased to exist. There was only the room, the night, and the raw, unadmitable truth of their bond. Jax's hands were everywhere, learning the lines of her body with a desperate, frantic reverence. His touch was a mixture of savage possession and a tenderness so profound it made her ache. He was a warrior home from the war, and she was his spoils, his sanctuary, his peace. He carried her to the bedroom, a space of silk sheets and soft, golden light, and laid her gently on the bed. For a long moment he just looked at her, his stormy gray eyes blazing with 1,000 emotions: gratitude, desire, a fierce, bone-deep love that he didn't yet have the words for. He was the hunter, the lone wolf, the killer. But here in this room with her he was just a male who had finally found the other half of his soul. "I thought I'd lost you before I ever really had you," he whispered, his voice rough with emotion as he brushed a stray strand of hair from her cheek. "You were never going to lose me," Chloe replied, her own voice thick. She reached up, her fingers tracing the fresh cut on his jaw. "Never." The slow, reverent exploration gave way to a renewed, searing urgency. Clothes became an intolerable barrier, shed with a desperate haste until there was nothing between them but skin and the thrumming, incandescent energy of their bond. He explored her body not just with his hands and his mouth, but with the bond itself, a psychic caress that left her breathless. He could feel what she felt, sense her every shiver of pleasure, her every gasp of need. And she could feel him. The raw, untamed power of his wolf, now tempered with a desperate, yearning love for her. The deep, aching loneliness that had been his constant companion for years, now being filled, healed by her presence. She felt his gratitude, his overwhelming relief, and a protectiveness so fierce it was a physical force. When he finally claimed her, it was not an act of dominance, but of completion. It was a joining of two fractured souls, a collision of shadow and light. It was the lone wolf finally finding his pack, his home, in the arms of a human woman who had looked into the heart of his storm and had not been afraid. They moved together in a rhythm as ancient as the moon, a savage dance of fate and choice, their cries of pleasure mingling in the quiet, golden room. Afterward they lay tangled in the sheets, their bodies slick with sweat, their hearts beating in a slow, steady rhythm. Chloe traced the faint, silvery lines of an old scar on his chest, a road map of the hard life he had lived. "Tell me," she whispered into the quiet darkness. "Tell me how you became a lone wolf." He was silent for a long time and she thought he wouldn't answer. But then he took a deep breath, his arm tightening around her, pulling her impossibly closer. "Pie Pack," he began, his voice a low, painful rumble. "The Silver Creek Pack. We were small, isolated. We kept to the old ways. When I was 16, another larger pack wanted our territory. They didn't negotiate. They just came." His voice was flat, scrubbed of emotion, but the bond between them was a raw conduit of his grief, a cold, hollow ache of loss that made her own heart clench. "They slaughtered them," he said. "My parents, my sister, everyone. I was the only one who got away. I've been running ever since. Hunted because the pack that destroyed mine put a bounty on my head to erase the last living witness. Surviving but never living." He turned his head on the pillow, his stormy eyes finding hers in the dim light. "Until you." Tears welled in Chloe's eyes, for the boy he had been, for the pain he had carried alone for so long. She leaned in and kissed him, a soft, gentle kiss that was a world away from the desperate passion of before. It was a kiss of healing, of understanding. A silent vow that he would never be alone again. He was a survivor who had forgotten how to live, and she was the woman who would teach him. Chapter 17. The Serpent's Smile. The morning after felt like the first day of a new world. Waking up in Jax's arms was a revelation. The constant thrum of anxiety that had been her companion for days was gone, replaced by a deep, bone-deep sense of peace. The bond between them was a calm, warm, sunlit river. For the first time she felt truly, completely safe. Jax was already awake, watching her, a soft, almost boyish smile on his face. The hardened warrior was gone, and in his place was a man at peace, a wolf in his own den with his mate beside him. Their idyllic bubble was burst by a polite knock on the door. It was the grim-faced she-wolf, with a breakfast tray and a message. "Alpha Roman requests your presence in his office in 1 hour." The mood shifted instantly. The peace evaporated, replaced by the cold reality of their situation. They were still in the lion's den, and their protector was also their master. When they entered Roman's office an hour later, the Alpha was not alone. Silas, the radical leader of the hunters, was there standing before Roman's desk. He was not in chains. He was dressed in a clean, dark suit, his face bruised and his arm in a sling, souvenirs from his encounter with Jax, but his eyes held a cold, unrepentant arrogance. "Ah, the happy couple," Roman said, a thin, unreadable smile on his lips. "Join us. We are just concluding the matter of Silas's overzealousness." Jax's body went rigid, a low growl rumbling in his chest. He moved to stand slightly in front of Chloe, a protective barrier. "Concluding?" Jax snarled. "He tried to kill my mate. The law demands his life." "The law also demands pack stability," Roman said smoothly. "Silas, while misguided, has a great deal of support among the pack's more traditional elements. To execute him would be to make him a martyr. It would create a schism I have no desire to mend with bloodshed." "So you are letting him go?" Chloe asked, her voice filled with disbelief. "Not at all, my dear," Roman said, his dark eyes twinkling with a cunning light. "I am promoting him." Both Jax and Chloe stared at him, stunned into silence. "Silas's talents as a hunter and a strategist are undeniable," Roman continued, as if discussing a business merger. "They were simply misdirected. I am creating a new position for him. He will be my master of internal security. His new duty will be to hunt down any and all threats to the Onyx Fong pack from within." The genius of the move was as brilliant as it was perverse. Roman had not just neutralized Silas. He had turned him into his own personal attack dog, setting the fanatical purist to hunt other traitors. He had given Silas power, but had chained it directly to his own authority. Silas turned his head, his cold, reptilian eyes landing on Jax. There was no remorse in his gaze, only a deep, simmering hatred. "The lone wolf kneels," he sneered, "and hides behind his human pet." Before Jax could lunge, Roman's voice cut through the air, sharp as a whip. "Enough, Silas. Jax is one of us now. And his mate is under my personal protection. You will remember that. Your new position is a privilege, not a right. It can be revoked as easily as your life." Silas's jaw tightened, but he bowed his head in a gesture of grudging submission. "Alpha. Now get out of my sight," Roman commanded. Silas shot one last venomous glare at Chloe and Jax before turning and stalking from the room. The air he left behind was thick with the promise of future conflict. "He will not stop," Jax growled, his eyes fixed on the door Silas had disappeared through. "He will see this as a challenge. He will wait for his moment. And I will be waiting for him to slip," Roman said calmly. "You have a new role now, Jax. You are not just my enforcer. You are my check against him. He watches you and you watch him. A perfect, delicate balance of power." He smiled, the serpent smile of a master manipulator who had just perfectly arranged all the pieces on his board. "As for your mate," Roman said, his gaze settling on Chloe, "she is of course free to go. The threat is neutralized." The words were a test. Chloe's heart leaped into her throat. She could leave. She could walk out of this den of wolves and back to her quiet, safe human life. Back to her blueprints and her tea in her lonely apartment. She looked at Jax, at the sudden raw fear that flashed in his stormy eyes. The fear of being alone again. She reached out and took his hand, her fingers lacing through his. The shimmering mark on her palm glowed with a soft, steady light. "My place is with my mate," she said, her voice clear and strong, her gaze fixed on Roman. The golden cage had become a sanctuary. The lone wolf had become her home. And she wasn't leaving. Chapter 18. A new kind of blueprint. Chloe's declaration hung in the air, a final, irrevocable choice. Roman's eyebrows lifted in what might have been genuine surprise, or perhaps just appreciation for a game piece that had shown unexpected spirit. He gave a slight, regal nod. "As you wish. The sanctuary of the Onyx Fong is extended to you, Luna." The title, Luna, felt strange and heavy, a cloak of responsibility she had never asked for. But as Jax's hand tightened around hers, the warmth and strength that flowed from him through the bond felt like an anchor, not a chain. Life found a new, surreal rhythm. Jax, now Roman's official enforcer and Silas's unofficial watchdog, was a constant, powerful presence in the pack's hierarchy. He moved through the dark, wood-paneled halls of the sanctum not as a ghost, but as a prince of the shadows, his authority quiet but absolute. He was a creature of immense power, finally given a purpose beyond mere survival. Chloe in turn began to carve out her own territory. She refused to remain a pampered prisoner in the golden cage of the penthouse. Armed with a quiet determination and the undeniable authority of her new title, she began to explore. She found that the Onyx Fong pack, for all its power and ruthless reputation, was a pack with deep, neglected roots. The families of the lower-ranking members lived in aging, neglected tenements. The pups had no safe place to play. The healers worked with outdated equipment. She saw the pack not as a corporate hierarchy or a military unit, but as a community. A city. And she was an architect. She started small. She approached Roman not with a plea but with a proposal. A blueprint. It was a design for a community center, a safe, warm space in the heart of their territory with a clinic, a daycare, and an indoor training ground for the pups. Roman had looked at her blueprints, his dark eyes shrewd and calculating. "This is an expensive project, my dear. What is my return on this investment?" "Loyalty," Chloe had answered simply. "Happy families create loyal warriors. Healthy pups create a strong future. You rule through fear and power, Alpha. Let me show you how to rule through strength and devotion." To everyone's surprise, he had agreed. The project became her purpose. She was on site every day. Her heart had a strange sight among the hulking shifters of the construction crew. They were wary of her at first, this soft human Luna. But they saw the passion in her eyes, the intelligence in her designs, and the fierce, protective presence of Jax, who was never far from her side. They saw the way their Alpha's enforcer looked at his mate, with a mixture of awe, devotion, and a possessive pride that dared anyone to question her. And slowly, grudgingly, they began to respect her. Jax found a new side of himself in this world. He was not just a warrior. He was a partner. He would stand with her, his presence a silent wall of support as she negotiated with contractors. He would listen as she talked excitedly about load-bearing walls and natural light, his expression one of rapt attention, even if he didn't understand half of what she was saying. One evening, they were standing on the unfinished second floor of the new community center, the setting sun casting long shadows through the building's skeletal framework. "I never thought I would build anything again," he said, his voice a low rumble as he looked out at the city. "I've only ever known how to run. How to destroy." Chloe came to stand beside him, leaning her head against his shoulder. "You're not destroying anything," she said softly. "You're protecting. So that things like this can be built." He wrapped his arm around her, pulling her close. The bond between them was a deep, tranquil sea. The frantic, desperate need of their first weeks together had mellowed into a profound, unshakable connection. He was her shield. She was his home. "I love you, Chloe," he whispered into her hair, the words as natural and as necessary as breathing. "I love you, Jax," she replied, her heart full. In the distance, a lone wolf howled, a mournful, lonely sound. But this time it didn't sound like a call of desolation. Sounded like a salute. The lone wolf had found his pack, and together, they were building a new world from the blueprints of a love that had been forged in the darkness. Chapter 19. The Serpent's Last Strike. The community center was nearly complete. A grand opening ceremony was planned, a celebration that was to be a symbol of the new era for the Onyx Fong pack. The fragile peace had held for months, a tense but stable balance of power. Silas was a model of cold efficiency in his new role, his fanatical zeal now directed at Roman's enemies. But Jax never trusted him. He watched him always, the bond between him and Chloe a silent alarm system, always scanning for a threat. The warning came on the night before the ceremony. It wasn't a shout, it was a whisper. A flicker of cold, murderous intent that lanced through the bond from Jax to Chloe while she slept. She sat bolt upright in bed, her heart hammering. Jax. He was not beside her. He was standing by the window of their penthouse, a dark silhouette against the moonlit city. He was perfectly still, but she could feel the rage coiling inside him, a predator that had scented its prey. "What is it?" she whispered, slipping out of bed to join him. "He's making a move," Jax growled, his voice a low, lethal vibration. "Silas. He's at the center. He thinks no one is watching." "What is he doing?" "I don't know," Jax admitted, his eyes narrowed, focused on the distant, dark shape of the new building. "But he's not alone. And his intent, It's black. They didn't call the guards. They didn't alert Roman. This was personal. This was the final, inevitable confrontation. They moved together through the sleeping city, two shadows with a single purpose. The community center was dark and silent, smelling of fresh paint and new wood. They slipped inside through an unlocked service entrance. The main hall was a cavern of shadows, the moonlight streaming through the high windows painting stripes of silver on the floor. They found Silas in the pup's daycare room. He was not alone. Marcus, the dead-eyed hunter, was with him. Or rather, what was left of him. Marcus was chained to a support beam, his body a canvas of brutal injuries, but his obsidian eyes were still filled with a defiant, fanatical light. "I knew you would come," Silas said, turning from his prisoner to face them. He held a small, simple detonator in his hand. Taped around the support beams of the room were several blocks of plastic explosives. "What is this, Silas?" Jax snarled, stepping in front of Chloe. Silas smiled, a chilling, triumphant expression. "A cleansing. This building, this monument to your human's weakness. It is an infection. I will cut it out." He looked at Marcus. "My most loyal follower. He failed me. He allowed himself to be captured. He is weak. And so he will be the first to be purged in the fire." He was insane. A true fanatic willing to sacrifice his own followers, his own pack's future for his twisted ideology. "And you thought I would let you do this?" Jax growled. "I knew you would come to stop me," Silas corrected, his thumb stroking the button on the detonator. "But you see, you are the true target. I will die a martyr tonight, destroying this temple of weakness. My followers will rise up. But you, the lone wolf who brought this human plague upon us, you will die with me. A fitting end." He was going to bring the building down on all of them. Chloe's mind was racing. He was a fanatic. He wasn't afraid to die. A direct attack was what he wanted. "You're wrong, Silas," Chloe said, her voice surprisingly calm. She stepped out from behind Jax, her gaze fixed on the zealot. "The human speaks," Silas sneered. "You see me as a weakness," Chloe continued, taking a slow step forward. "But you don't understand. A bond like ours, it's not a weakness. It's a new kind of strength." She looked at Jax, pouring all her love, all her trust into the bond between them. "Get ready," she sent to him, a pure, silent thought. She turned back to Silas. "You think you can destroy us? You can't destroy this." She held up her hand, the silvery mark on her palm beginning to glow with a soft, intense light. The light of the bond, fueled by her love, her courage. Silas stared at the light, momentarily mesmerized. The pure, untainted power of it was an anathema to his dark, hateful soul. It was in that moment of distraction that Jax moved. He didn't lunge. He flowed. A blur of shadow and speed. He wasn't aiming for Silas. He was aiming for Marcus. With a single powerful wrench, he ripped the support beam Marcus was chained to from its floor moorings. With a roar, he heaved the entire massive structure, man and beam, directly at Silas. Silas screamed, a sound of shock and fury as he was crushed, the detonator flying from his hand. The building groaned, the loss of the support beam compromising its structure. "Chloe, go!" Jax roared, already moving towards the exit. He didn't hesitate. She ran, her heart pounding as behind her the sound of groaning metal and cracking concrete filled the air. She burst out into the cool night air moments before Jax emerged, scooping her up into his arms without breaking stride. They were 100 yards away when the roof of the daycare wing collapsed with a deafening final roar, burying the hate-filled zealot and his last loyal follower in a tomb of their own making. Chapter 20. The first morning. They stood in the cool, pre-dawn light, watching as the dust settled over the ruined wing of the community center. The sounds of approaching sirens grew louder, a chorus heralding the end of a war. Roman's wolves were descending on the scene, securing the perimeter, beginning the investigation that would ultimately declare the collapse a tragic accident caused by faulty construction. The serpent had been excised, its venom neutralized forever. Jax held Chloe tight against him, his face buried in her hair, his body trembling with the aftermath of the battle. The fight was over. The hunt was finally, truly done. "It's finished," she whispered, her hands stroking his back, soothing the tense, coiled muscles. "It's finished," he echoed, his voice thick with a relief so profound it was almost painful. He pulled back, his stormy eyes searching hers in the dim light. "Are you all right?" She smiled, a genuine radiant smile that felt like the first sunrise. "I'm perfect." They didn't wait for Roman. They didn't wait for the pack. They walked away from the wreckage, hand in hand, and headed not towards the cold, stone fortress of the sanctum, but in the opposite direction. They walked for hours through the sleeping city, as the sky slowly brightened from indigo to a soft, pearly gray. They didn't speak. There were no words for the journey they had taken, for the profound, unshakable peace that had settled in their souls. The bond between them was a deep, tranquil ocean, calm and endless. They ended up at the river just as the sun began to crest the horizon, painting the water in strokes of brilliant gold and rose. They stood on the promenade, the cool morning breeze whipping through Chloe's hair. The city was waking up, its familiar roar a distant, gentle hum. "I've never seen a sunrise before," Jack said, his voice quiet with awe. "Not really. I was always hiding before the sun came up." Chloe leaned her head on his shoulder, her heart so full it felt like it would overflow. "There will be thousands more," she promised. He turned to her, his expression one of such deep, tender love that it made her breath catch. He reached into the pocket of his jacket and pulled out a simple, tarnished silver key. "I found a place," he said, pressing the key into her hand. "It's small. Overlooks a park. It's quiet. It's not a fortress or a cage." He took a deep breath, his gray eyes shining with a vulnerable, hopeful light. "It's a home. Our home. If you'll have it." Tears streamed down Chloe's face, tears of pure, unadulterated joy. She couldn't speak. She just threw her arms around his neck and kissed him, a kiss that tasted of new beginnings and endless sunrises. It wasn't a grand gesture. It was a quiet promise. A promise of a normal life, a life of sleepy mornings and shared cups of tea, of arguments over blueprints and nights spent tangled together in a bed that was theirs and theirs alone. A life away from the shadows, away from the hunt. A life of peace. As the sun climbed higher, bathing them in its warm, golden light, the shimmering mark on Chloe's palm gave one last, brilliant pulse and then faded, sinking deep into her skin, no longer a brand of fate, but a simple, beautiful scar, a permanent reminder of the stranger on the train. The lone wolf had led her into the darkness, but in doing so had brought her into the most beautiful light she had ever known. And this was only their first morning.